lights, turn off notifications, grab something cold to drink, because what you're about to hear will make you double-check your backyard before stepping outside. We're going back millions of years to a land where evolution lost its mind and created a continent that didn't just want to kill you. It wanted to invent new ways to do it. Welcome to prehistoric Australia, where nature's deadliest ideas didn't just survive, they thrived.
Picture your typical Australian vacation sun-kissed beaches, kangaroos hopping about, and that one spider in your hotel room that makes you sleep with one eye open. Terrifying, right? Well, buckle up, sunshine, because prehistoric Australia makes today's venomous wonderland look like a petting zoo run by kindergarten teachers. You think drop bears are scary urban legends? Try a marsupial lion dropping from a tree onto your SUV-sized wombat ancestor. Modern Australia merely inherited the nightmare prehistoric Australia, perfected it first. Welcome to the land down under. Way, way under in time. Where evolution said, "Hold my beer," and created a laboratory of lethal experiments that would make even Darwin wince and mutter, "Mate, that's a bit excessive." This wasn't survival of the fittest. This was survival of the most horrifying. For millions of years, Australia operated like nature's fight club. The first rule was there were no rules. The second rule? Everything wants to eat you, poison you, or both simultaneously while laying eggs in your carcass. Evolution didn't just throw the rulebook out the window here. It set the rulebook on fire, mixed the ashes with venom, and injected it into creatures with too many teeth. Think your morning commute is rough? Imagine navigating a landscape where the birds weigh as much as your compact car and consider your ancestors a crunchy snack, where crocodiles the size of buses patrolled waterways, and the mammals had the audacity to develop pouches not for convenience, but to better hunt you down. Australia today has earned its reputation as a continent seemingly designed to eliminate human life through an impressive array of venomous snakes, poisonous spiders, and sharks with anger management issues. Yet this modern collection of death dealers is merely the watered-down, tourist-friendly version of a prehistoric murder continent that spent millions of years perfecting the art of nope. If you like this kind of video, please hit the like button, but only if this video touches you in a way that only deep geological history can. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories from the earliest times, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next apocalyptic adventure. And leave a comment below. Where are you watching from? We have viewers from every corner of the modern-day descendants of Pangaea. Let's see how global we can make this conversation. While the rest of the world's continents were swapping species like trading cards, I'll give you 2 deer species for that wolf variant. Australia floated away like the antisocial teenager of continental plates. This splendid isolation created what scientists call an evolutionary laboratory, which is a polite way of saying a place where natural selection went completely off its medication. The climate during much of this period was significantly warmer and wetter than today. Even Antarctica was a lush green paradise. Picture Australia as a continent-sized greenhouse, humid, tropical, and absolutely perfect for encouraging life to grow to absurd proportions. Nothing says evolutionary pressure cooker quite like a warm, wet environment with abundant resources and predators evolving in real time to better eat you. During the Paleocene and Eocene, 66 to 33.9 million years ago, Australia was still attached to Antarctica, creating a moist, temperate wonderland. Vast forests of southern beaches, early eucalypts, and primitive conifers covered the landscape. It was essentially a continent-sized botanical garden, where everything was trying to develop better ways to poison anything that might eat it. As Australia continued its northward journey through the Oligocene and Miocene, 33.9, 5.3 million years ago, a critical transformation began. The continent dried out, not in the way your skin does after swimming, but in the dramatic, landscape-altering fashion that would eventually give us the outback Earth's way of creating a pan and putting it on high heat for a few million years. This aridification wasn't just a weather forecast gone wrong. It was a fundamental restructuring of Australia's ecosystems. The lush rainforests retreated to the coasts like vacationers abandoning a beach during a shark sighting, and in their place emerged grasslands, woodlands, and eventually deserts that would make Mad Max feel right at home. The Great Dividing Range, Australia's eastern mountain chain, played meteorological bouncer, creating a rain shadow effect that left much of the interior parched. These mountains weren't the towering Himalayas. They were more like Earth's version of a speed bump. But they were just tall enough to block moisture and create that distinctive Australian landscape of extremely wet on one side, bone dry on the other. Meanwhile, Australia's soils were aging ungracefully. Unlike other continents that got regular rejuvenation from volcanic activity or mountain building, much of Australia's landscape remained tectonically stable, the geological equivalent of never exfoliating. The result? Some of Earth's oldest, most nutrient-poor soils, which forced plants to become experts in doing more with less, like college students surviving on ramen. The final geological plot twist came during the Pleistocene, 2.6 million to 11,700 years ago, when global climate patterns went through more mood swings than a teenager. Ice ages came and went, sea levels dropped and rose, and Australia's already strange ecosystems had to adapt or die. Spoiler alert, many did both, often in spectacular fashion. This geological and climate roller coaster created a continent of extremes, from tropical rainforests to arid deserts, from cool temperate woodlands to savanna grasslands. And in each of these environments, evolution worked over time, creating creatures specialized for their ecological niches with the enthusiasm of an overzealous engineer with unlimited coffee and no supervision. Australia wasn't just a land down under, it was a land apart geologically, climatically, and biologically. This isolation created the perfect conditions for evolution to experiment with designs that would never have survived elsewhere, like releasing beta software without proper testing. The results were predictably catastrophic, frequently bizarre, and absolutely fascinating. If you think modern Australia is trying to kill you with its venomous snakes, poisonous spiders, and politicians, you'd be right. But prehistoric Australia, it wasn't just trying to kill you, it had perfected the art, published a handbook, and was offering master classes in elimination. Let's establish a crucial point. Prehistory wasn't inherently more dangerous than today everywhere on Earth. In many places, you might have encountered familiar dangers, predators, disease, the occasional volcano having a bad day. But Australia? Australia was playing a completely different game, one where the difficulty setting was permanently stuck on nightmare mode. The isolation that made Australia evolution's private laboratory created a paradox of safety and danger. On one hand, Australia's separation from other continents meant it was safely removed from many of the predatory species developing elsewhere. No lions, no tigers, no bears. Oh my, what a relief. On the other hand, this same isolation meant that when Australia did develop predators, they evolved to fill ecological niches in ways that would make a horror movie director say, "No, that's too unrealistic." Take the Thylacoleo carnifex, the marsupial lion. Despite the name, it wasn't a lion at all. It was a marsupial that convergently evolved to fill the lion's ecological niche. But instead of playing by the big cat rulebook, it developed the strongest bite force relative to body size of any mammal, living or extinct. Its massive slicing premolars could cut through bone like a hot knife through butter. Its thumb was a lethal spike, and unlike actual lions, it was an ambush predator that could climb trees. Sleep tight knowing that death could literally drop on your head at any moment. Australia's unique danger was exemplified by its megafauna creatures that took the concept of supersizing to heart long before fast food chains made it trendy. While North America had its mammoths and Europe had its cave bears, Australia had 10-foot-tall kangaroos that could disembowel you with a single kick, wombats the size of rhinos, and birds that made ostriches look like budgies. The safety of isolation also created perhaps the most dangerous situation of all. creatures that evolved without fear. On continents with competitive predators, animals developed appropriate fear responses. In prehistoric Australia, with fewer competing apex predators, some creatures evolved without these instincts, making them both more vulnerable to human hunters when they eventually arrived, and paradoxically, more dangerous because they didn't run away when they should have. Australia's danger wasn't just in its oversized or overtly threatening creatures. The continent specialized in subtle lethality. Plants evolved toxins that would make modern pharmaceuticals seem like candy. Fungi developed compounds that could shut down your organs in creative sequences. Even the soil contained bacteria with unique properties that other continents' immune systems had never encountered. The climate amplified these dangers. Extreme weather cycles meant that resources could be abundant one season and scarce the next. This created evolutionary pressure to be opportunistic, to eat whatever you could, whenever you could, however you could. The result? Creatures that weren't picky about their protein sources, including anything that moved, breathed, or looked vaguely nutritious. Perhaps most terrifying was the continental Russian roulette of Australia's water sources. In a land where drought was common, water holes became both salvation and death trap. Picture the scene. You're desperately thirsty. You find water. You approach cautiously. And that's when you discover that every other creature in a 50-mile radius had the same idea. Some are hungry. Some are territorial. All are desperate. This wasn't just a predator-prey relationship. This was a gladiatorial arena where the prize was simply surviving another day. The adaptations that made prehistoric Australian creatures dangerous weren't just physical, they were behavioral. Predators developed cooperative hunting strategies. Prey developed complex warning systems, and both evolved intelligence in the endless evolutionary arms race. This wasn't mindless danger. This was calculated strategic lethality refined over millions of years. Modern Australia's dangers are well-documented. 7 of the world's 10 most venomous snakes call it home, along with box jellyfish, blue-ringed octopuses, and spiders that make arachnophobes book flights to Antarctica. But these are mere shadows, the evolutionary echoes of a time when the entire continent was effectively a danger zone with occasional safe spots, rather than today's reverse. Prehistoric Australia wasn't just uniquely dangerous, it was uniquely creative in its danger, a master artist working in the medium of mortality. It was the ultimate test environment for life's resilience, ingenuity, and capacity to survive against increasingly absurd odds. And against all probability, life there didn't just survive. It thrived, diversified, and occasionally grew to terrifying proportions. Let's meet the stars of our prehistoric Australian horror show. The creatures that would make modern wildlife documentaries look like episodes of Teletubbies. First up, the Megalania, Varanus priscus, a lizard that took the concept of the Komodo dragon and said, "That's cute, let me show you how it's done." Stretching up to 23 feet long and weighing as much as a small car, this monitor lizard was essentially a scaly garbage truck with teeth. Its mouth was a bacterial playground that made a public restroom look sterile by comparison. One bite, and you weren't just dinner. You were a walking infection waiting to happen. Imagine being pursued by something with the speed of a modern monitor lizard, but the size of a school bus. Its lumbering gait might have given you false hope of escape, until you realized that, like its modern relatives, it had the stamina to track you for days. It didn't need to outrun you. It just needed to outweight your inevitable exhaustion. Next, meet Thylacoleo carnifex, the marsupial lion nature's attempt at creating a horror movie villain. This wasn't just a big cat with a pouch. This was evolution's masterclass in efficient killing. Picture a creature with the body of a lion, the head of a koala on steroids, and teeth that would make a chainsaw feel inadequate. Its bite force could crack through turtle shells and bone with the ease of someone opening a soda can. But the real nightmare fuel? Those opposable thumbs ending in retractable claws, perfect for climbing trees and dropping on unsuspecting prey. It was essentially a 300-pound murder machine that could hunt you in 3 dimensions. Sleep tight! Let's not forget Diprotodon, the largest marsupial ever to exist. Imagine a wombat the size of a rhino, weighing up to 2.8 tons. While not carnivorous, this herbivorous tank could crush you without malice, not because it wanted to eat you, but simply because you were in its way, and it didn't notice your screaming. Its sheer mass would have made it virtually immune to predators once fully grown. The ground literally shook when herds of these creatures migrated. In the marsupial world, Diprotodon was the evolutionary equivalent of go big or go home. The skies weren't safe either, thanks to Diatryma, a flightless bird standing 7 feet tall with a head the size of a horse's. This wasn't your friendly neighborhood ostrich. This was a bird whose beak could crush bones and whose territorial displays would make modern cassowaries look like pacifists. Imagine a creature with the speed of an Olympic sprinter, the attitude of a honey badger, and a beak designed to impale first and ask questions never. They hunted in groups, communicating with calls that would sound like the soundtrack from your worst nightmares. The waters of prehistoric Australia offered no refuge, thanks to Kronosaurus queenslandicus, a marine reptile that made modern great white sharks look like goldfish. Stretching up to 33 feet long, with a skull the size of a small car, this pliosaur patrolled Australia's inland seas with the confidence of something at the absolute top of the food chain. Its 4 powerful flippers propelled it through water with the speed and maneuverability of a modern dolphin, but with the bite force of something engineered specifically to induce terror. Each of its teeth, and it had plenty, was the size of a banana, designed not just to catch prey, but to pulverize it. Australia's prehistoric insects deserve special mention, if only to ensure you never sleep soundly again. Consider Meganosoptera, dragonflies with wingspans of over 2 feet. These weren't just big bugs. They were precision aerial predators with vision systems that could detect movement from football fields away. Their larvae, equally terrifying, were aquatic predators that could take down small fish and amphibians with specialized jaw extensions that shot out like something from the Alien movies. Even Australia's prehistoric plants got in on the action. The continent boasted carnivorous plants that grew large enough to trap small mammals, using digestive enzymes that would dissolve flesh with disturbing efficiency. Imagine walking through what appeared to be a normal forest, only to discover that some of the foliage was actively trying to dissolve you. Procoptodon goliath, the giant short-faced kangaroo, stood 10 feet tall and could hop at speeds that would get it ticketed in school zones. Unlike its modern descendants, this kangaroo had a single giant claw on each foot, not for defense, but as an adaptation to its increasingly arid environment. Still, a kick from this creature wouldn't just hurt. It would send you to the emergency room, assuming emergency rooms existed and weren't themselves terrified of giant kangaroos. The quincana, a terrestrial crocodile that could gallop at speeds of up to 30 mph, patrolled the forests of prehistoric Australia like something straight out of a monster movie. Unlike modern crocodiles that ambush prey at water's edge, these nightmares on legs actively pursued their dinner across dry land. Their serrated teeth weren't designed for gripping like modern crocodiles. They were specialized for slicing flesh with precision that would make a surgeon jealous. Let's not overlook the wonambi, a snake that grew to lengths of 20 feet or more. Unlike modern constrictors that merely squeeze their prey to death, paleontological evidence suggests these serpents had specialized jaw adaptations that could dislocate not just to swallow prey whole, but to create a vacuum seal that would suffocate larger prey before consumption even began. Imagine being hugged to death, then vacuum-packed for convenient storage. The Gignornis, a flightless bird standing 7 feet tall with a massive beak designed to crush bones to extract marrow, roamed in flocks that could strip vegetation with the efficiency of modern industrial harvesters. These weren't just big birds, they were feathered bulldozers with territorial instincts that made them attack anything unfamiliar, which, given Australia's isolation, was pretty much everything. Perhaps most disturbing of all was Megalibguilia, a prehistoric echidna the size of a sheep. Modern echidnas are cute, spiky anteaters. Their prehistoric cousins were armored tanks with tongues that could extend over a foot to extract prey from crevices. Their spines weren't just defensive, they were coated with compounds that would cause intense pain and inflammation if they pierced skin. These creatures weren't just big or scary, they were evolutionary specialists, perfectly adapted to Australia's unique and challenging environments. They represented nature's most creative attempts at survival in a land where normal rules didn't apply. They weren't monsters. They were masterpieces of adaptive evolution, each one a testament to life's remarkable ability to find a way, usually a terrifying way, to thrive in the most challenging of circumstances. The curtain falls on prehistoric Australia's nightmare theater, not with a whimper, but with a series of devastating, world-altering bangs. Like any good horror franchise, this one saved its most spectacular kills for the final act. Picture this. Approximately 45,000 years ago, a new predator arrived on Australian shores. No claws, no venomous bite, no imposing size, just oversized brains, opposable thumbs, and a remarkably casual attitude towards setting things on fire. Humans had entered the chat, and Australia's megafauna was about to be left on red permanently. The debate around what exactly caused Australia's megafaunal extinction makes modern political arguments look like polite tea-time conversation. In the red corner, human hunting and habitat modification. In the blue corner, climate change and increasing aridity. And circling the ring, the possibility that it was a 1-2 punch combination of both. What we do know is that within a few thousand years of human arrival, an evolutionary blink of an eye, around 86% of Australia's large animal species had checked out permanently. Coincidence? Perhaps, but it's the kind of coincidence that makes insurance investigators raise skeptical eyebrows. The human impact theory suggests our ancestors arrived with something more dangerous than any claw or fang: fire stick farming. Ancient Australians didn't just hunt megafauna directly, they transformed entire ecosystems through controlled burning. This wasn't malicious destruction, it was sophisticated land management that unfortunately came with unintended side effects, like accidentally rewriting the evolutionary playbook that had been in development for millions of years. Imagine the scene: a herd of Diprotodon, those rhino-sized wombats, peacefully grazing on vegetation that had sustained their kind for millennia. On the horizon, smoke rises. The landscape that has been their grocery store is rapidly becoming char-grilled. These massive herbivores, which had evolved in a world without human predators, suddenly found themselves trapped between advancing flames and spear-wielding bipeds who developed a taste for supersized marsupial steaks. But humans weren't working alone. Mother Nature, never one to miss out on a good extinction event, had her own plans brewing. The planet was in the grip of climate shifts that were turning Australia's already challenging environment into something even more extreme. The continent was drying out faster than laundry in the outback sun. Lake Eyre, once an inland sea that covered a significant portion of central Australia, began its transformation into the salt pan we know today. Imagine witnessing a body of water the size of some European countries simply evaporating over generations. The animals that had evolved to depend on these water sources found themselves participating in a continent-wide game of musical chairs, except when the music stopped, there weren't just inadequate chairs, there was no furniture at all. The combination was lethal. Species that might have adapted to human hunting alone, or climate change alone, couldn't handle both simultaneously. It was like trying to study for finals while your apartment is on fire, technically possible, but practically impossible. The extinction wasn't instantaneous. This wasn't an asteroid hit with a convenient "the end" title card. It was a slow-motion train wreck spanning thousands of years. Some species held on longer than others. The thylacine, or Tasmanian tiger, managed to survive on the mainland until about 3,000 years ago before retreating to Tasmania, only to be hunted to extinction by European settlers in the 1930s, Prehistoric Australia's horror show getting an unexpected modern sequel. The Genyornis, that terrifying giant bird, appears to have been among the first casualties, disappearing around 45,000 years ago. Archaeological evidence shows that humans not only hunted these birds, but had developed a taste for their eggs, literally eating the next generation before it had a chance to hatch. Talk about cutting off a problem at the source. As the megafauna disappeared, Australia's ecosystems underwent cascading changes that would have been visually spectacular if they weren't ecologically catastrophic. Forests that had been kept in check by browsing diprotodons expanded. Grasslands that had been maintained by specific grazing patterns transformed. Fire regimes changed as vegetation shifted. It was like watching dominoes fall, except each domino was an entire ecosystem. The final twist in this extinction tale is that some creatures didn't just die out, they downsized. The red kangaroo and gray kangaroo of today are the evolutionary shadows of their giant ancestors, having shrunk to sizes that could better evade human hunters and survive in the new, resource-limited Australia. Evolution's response to the apocalypse wasn't just extinction, it was extreme dieting. By 30,000 years ago, the curtain had effectively fallen on prehistoric Australia's most spectacular creatures. The continent that had spent millions of years as evolution's most creative laboratory had been permanently altered. The nightmare fuel that had powered the engines of natural selection for eons had largely burned out, leaving behind a changed world still dangerous, still unique, but fundamentally transformed. So here we are, at the end of our prehistoric Australian horror show. The credits are rolling, the megafauna has taken its final bow, and we're left with the modern Australia we know today still trying to kill you, just with smaller teeth and more venom. The irony? That terrifying prehistoric menagerie we've spent the last hour discussing might have saved humanity from something even worse. Recent research suggests that Australia's unique evolutionary laboratory may have been responsible for developing immune responses to pathogens that could have otherwise wiped out early human populations. Those same deadly creatures that haunted our ancestors' nightmares might have inadvertently been training our immune systems for future battles. It's like finding out the serial killer next door has been secretly paying your college tuition. Perhaps the most disturbing twist in our tale is that we're currently in the midst of writing the sequel. Australia's modern extinction crisis is happening in real time, with the continent experiencing the highest mammal extinction rate in the world. The quoll, the numbat, the bilby creatures that survived the prehistoric apocalypse are now vanishing in the blink of an evolutionary eye. It seems we never quite lost our talent for reshaping Australia's biosphere, just our excuse of not knowing any better. Climate change, that co-star in our prehistoric extinction event, is making a comeback tour, with Australia experiencing more extreme droughts, fires, and weather events than ever before. It's like watching a reboot of a classic horror film, where the original actors have been replaced, but the plot remains disturbingly familiar. And what about those nightmare creatures we've discussed? Are they truly gone? Paleontologists regularly discover that supposedly extinct species survived much longer than we thought. The thylacine, officially declared extinct in 1936, continues to be cited regularly enough to fuel conspiracy theories. Aboriginal rock art suggests some megafauna may have persisted thousands of years longer than the fossil record indicates. Perhaps in the vast unexplored regions of Australia's interior, some prehistoric nightmares still lurk, waiting for their moment to reclaim the spotlight. Sleep tight, viewers, and next time you're swatting away mosquitoes in your backyard, be thankful they're not the size of seagulls, because in prehistoric Australia, they probably were. If you think modern pigs are impressive with their ability to find truffles and occasionally star in heartwarming children's movies, then prepare to have your bacon-loving mind completely blown. Meet Notocoeris, the prehistoric pig that makes Pumbaa from Lion King look like an underfed chihuahua in a pig costume. This wasn't just a pig. This was evolution's answer to the question nobody asked. What if we took a normal boar and turned the size dial to absolutely ridiculous while giving it tusks, that could double as household furniture. Welcome to the Pliocene, where apparently Mother Nature was going through her bigger is better phase and decided that what Africa really needed was a pig the size of your living room couch. While dinosaurs had long exited stage left in the great theatrical production we call Earth's history, mammals were busy auditioning for the role of most likely to terrify time travelers. And boy, did Notochorus nail that audition. This supersized swine roamed the African landscapes long before humans decided that bacon should be a breakfast staple, back when our ancestors were still figuring out that sticks could be useful tools and not just inconvenient things to trip over. If they'd encountered Notochorus, they'd have quickly realized that sticks weren't going to cut it against the prehistoric equivalent of a bulldozer with tusks. In an era when nature was experimenting with all sorts of evolutionary prototypes, Notochorus stood out as one of those designs that made perfect sense at the time, but looks absolutely bonkers in retrospect. It's as if evolution said, let's take this successful pig blueprint and just make it excessive in every possible way. And thus, the super pig was born an animal that didn't just adapt to its environment, but looked like it could redecorate it with minimal effort. Ladies and gentlemen, prepare yourselves for the untold story of the greatest pig that ever lived, a creature that took the concept of hog wild and turned it into an art form. Picture, if you will, a wild boar. Now imagine that this boar has been hitting the gym religiously for years, discovered prehistoric steroids, and decided that the standard pig size chart was more of a suggestion than a rule. That's Notochorus for you, the bodybuilder of the pig world that clearly missed the memo about reasonable proportions. Standing at shoulder heights that could reach up to 1.2 meters, about 4 feet, Notochorus wasn't just tall for a pig, it was tall enough to look a grown man directly in the eyes, presumably while contemplating whether said man would make a suitable appetizer. With body length stretching to a whopping 3 meters, 10 feet, and weights that could exceed 450 kilograms, nearly 1,000 pounds, this was essentially a pig that had consumed other pigs to gain their power. The skull alone was a masterpiece of evolutionary overkill, measuring up to 70 centimeters, 27 inches. In some species, the Notochorus cranium was like the Hummer H2 of pig heads, unnecessarily large, intimidating to look at, and probably consuming resources at an alarming rate. This cranial real estate housed a brain that, while not winning any Nobel Prizes, was perfectly adequate for an animal whose primary life philosophy appeared to be bigger is better and, when in doubt, charge at it. Let's talk tusks, because Notochorus had dental work that would make even the most prestigious cosmetic dentist weep with envy. The lower canines extended upward and outward in magnificent curves that could reach lengths of up to 30 centimeters, 12 inches. These weren't just teeth, they were multi-purpose tools that served as weapons, digging implements, and nature's version of a Swiss Army knife. If Notochorus smiled at you, it wouldn't. You'd be witnessing a dental arrangement that screamed, "I can open anything, including your vital organs." The body itself was a tank wrapped in pigskin, robust, powerful, and built with the apparent purpose of convincing everything else to get out of its way. The limbs were stockier than those of modern pigs, designed to support all that extra porcine prominence. This wasn't an animal designed for balletic grace. This was an animal designed to make the ground shake slightly when it decided to trot. Notochorus sported a coat that likely resembled that of modern warthogs' coarse, bristly hair covering a thick hide that served as nature's version of medieval armor. The coloration probably ranged from earthy browns to muddy grays, perfect for an animal that likely spent considerable time wallowing in whatever prehistoric mud pits were available. Think camouflage pattern designed by someone who really likes dirt tones. The eyes, small in proportion to that massive skull, likely held the perpetually suspicious look that all pigs seem to possess, as if they know something you don't and are silently judging your life choices. These weren't the cute, cartoon pig eyes that adorn children's farm toys. These were the calculating eyes of an animal that had evolved to trust nothing and prepare for everything. Its snout, that iconic pig feature, was a powerful excavating tool that could have qualified for heavy machinery licenses in today's construction industry. Elongated, muscular, and tipped with a cartilaginous disc, hardened enough to turn soil more effectively than some early human farming implements, the Notocoeris snout was the prehistoric equivalent of a backhoe attachment. The ears, likely large and pointed, would have swiveled like organic satellite dishes, constantly scanning for sounds of opportunity, food, or danger, something that somehow thought this walking tank looked like a reasonable meal. These weren't the floppy, adorable ears of domestic piglets. These were the alert, no-nonsense ears of an animal that had zero interest in being anyone's idea of cute. To complete this portrait of porcine perfection, add a tail that was probably short, straight, and utterly unimpressive compared to the rest of the animal, like an architectural afterthought on an otherwise imposing building. We've created this massive, tusked behemoth with jaws that could crush bone. Should we give it a majestic tail? Nah, just stick a little rope-like thing back there. No one will notice. When Notocoeris walked through the prehistoric African landscape, it didn't just leave footprints, it left impressions, both literal and figurative. This wasn't just a pig. This was nature's experiment in seeing just how intimidating a pig could become if given enough evolutionary time and an apparent disregard for reasonable size limitations. It was, in every sense, what happens when Mother Nature decides that normal pig isn't nearly dramatic enough for her prehistoric soap opera. Let's set our time machine to the Pliocene, epoch specifically, between 5.3 and 2.6 million years ago, when Earth was going through its awkward transitional phase between tropical paradise everywhere and ice sheets are coming, everybody panic. This was the geological equivalent of planetary puberty, with climates fluctuating like teenage mood swings and ecosystems redecorating themselves faster than an HGTV show on a tight deadline. Africa during this time was experiencing its own extreme makeover. The continent was shifting from the lush, forested wonderland of the earlier Miocene toward a more open, savanna-dominated landscape that would eventually serve as the backdrop for those wildlife documentaries your parents fall asleep to on Sunday afternoons. It was essentially Earth's way of saying, let's try something different with this space, and rolling out a massive grassland carpet across what had previously been forest. This climate shift wasn't just a casual change in scenery, it was a fundamental restructuring of African ecosystems that would eventually set the stage for human evolution. As forests retreated and grasslands expanded, a new premium was placed on adaptability. Animals either evolved to handle these changing conditions or joined the extensive list of cool prehistoric creatures you'll never get to see except as incomplete fossils in museums. Temperature-wise, the Pliocene started out 2 to 3 degrees Celsius warmer than today's climate, without any help from fossil fuels. Take that, modern industry, with carbon dioxide levels comparable to what we're experiencing now. The poles had significantly less ice, and sea levels were about 25 meters higher than our current waterfront property markers. Essentially, it was a preview of coming attractions for our own climate change situation, just without the accelerated timeline and panicking scientists. This warming period was followed by a cooling trend that would eventually lead to the ice ages of the Pleistocene. It's as if Earth was saying, enjoy this warm spell while it lasts, because winter is coming, several million years before George R.R. Martin made that phrase popular. In this transitional world, Notocoeris found itself in a perfect position to thrive. Africa was becoming a mosaic of environments, patches of woodland, interspersed with expanding grasslands, river systems creating corridors of lushness through increasingly arid regions, and seasonal changes becoming more pronounced. It was the ecological equivalent of a buffet restaurant, offering a little something for everyone, especially if you happen to be an adaptable omnivore with impressive tusks and an even more impressive appetite. The African animal community during this time was experiencing its own extreme version of networking. New species were arriving, old species were adapting or disappearing, and everything was renegotiating its place in the food web. It was like a high-stakes game of ecological musical chairs, with extinction being the fate of those who couldn't find a seat when the music stopped. This was the golden age of megafauna, when being absurdly large was actually a viable evolutionary strategy rather than a ticket to the extinction express. Alongside our supersized swine roamed early elephants still experimenting with trunk designs, massive prehistoric giraffes that made modern ones look positively petite, and saber-toothed cats who apparently believed that subtle dentition was for losers. Human ancestors were just beginning their own evolutionary journey during this time. Early hominins like Australopithecus were taking their first awkward steps toward bipedalism, essentially experimenting with the radical notion that maybe, just maybe, walking on two legs might be worth trying. These proto-humans were still very much part of the menu rather than top of the food chain, and a chance encounter with something like Notochorus would have been the prehistoric equivalent of a smart car meeting an 18-wheeler on a narrow road. The plant communities were equally in flux, with C4 grasses, those adapted to drier, higher light conditions, spreading across the landscape like nature's version of suburban development. These grasses were reshaping ecosystems from the ground up, creating new opportunities for grazers and browsers alike. It was the botanical equivalent of a gold rush, with various plant species competing to claim territory in this new world order. In this dynamic, shifting stage of Earth's history, Notochorus carved out its niche with the subtlety of a bulldozer through a china shop. It wasn't just surviving in this changing world, it was thriving, adapting, and in many ways defining what it meant to be successful in an era where the only constant was change itself. This wasn't just an animal that existed during interesting times, this was an animal that helped make those times interesting. If modern pigs have elevated rooting around in mud to an art form, then Notochorus turned it into a full-blown Olympic sport, complete with scoring for technical difficulty and artistic impression. This wasn't just a pig that dabbled in dirt. This was a geological force with tusks and an attitude. First and foremost, Notochorus was an omnivorous opportunist with a food philosophy best described as, if it exists, I can probably eat it. Plant materials formed the bulk of its diet, everything from grasses and sedges to fruits, tubers, and roots that didn't move fast enough to escape its industrial-grade snout. The dental arrangement of Notochorus tells us that it wasn't a picky eater. Its teeth were equipped to process pretty much anything that had the misfortune of looking edible. The massive tusks weren't just for show, though they certainly made a statement. These impressive dental protrusions served as multi-purpose tools for digging up roots and tubers hidden beneath the soil. Imagine a backhoe attachment made of ivory that could efficiently excavate the ground while simultaneously serving as a warning to anything considering making trouble. When Notochorus decided something underground looked tasty, it wasn't so much digging as it was remodeling the landscape with extreme prejudice. But let's not pigeonhole our prehistoric protagonist as just a plant muncher. Like modern pigs, Notochorus likely supplemented its diet with protein whenever the opportunity presented itself. Small animals, eggs, carrion, anything that provided a quick protein fix was probably fair game. This wasn't an apex predator by any stretch of the imagination, but it was certainly an animal that understood the nutritional value of a diverse portfolio. Social behavior in Notochorus likely mirrored that of modern wild boars and warthogs, with some supersizing to match its physical dimensions. Females and young probably formed sounders groups that provided safety in numbers and efficient foraging opportunities. Adult males, particularly during breeding seasons, likely engaged in the time-honored porcine tradition of trying to impress females by being as aggressively territorial as possible. Speaking of territorial aggression, when male Notochorus squared off against each other, it wasn't just a shoving match, it was a geological event. Picture two tank-sized pigs charging at each other with the combined momentum of freight trains, tusks positioned for maximum intimidation, and the sort of determination usually reserved for tax auditors who've found a discrepancy. These confrontations weren't just displays, they were reshaping the local topography one headbutt at a time. The breeding strategy of Notochorus followed the quantity has a quality all its own philosophy. Females likely produced multiple offspring per litter, perhaps not as many as modern domestic pigs with their dozen or more piglets, but certainly enough to ensure that the next generation of supersized swine would be well represented. Young Notochorus, while born relatively helpless, like modern piglets, probably developed quickly, because when you're potentially on the menu for every large predator in the neighborhood, childhood is more of a brief phase than an extended period. Daily life for Notochorus revolved around the 3 F's that drive most animal behavior: feeding, fighting, and family planning. Mornings and evenings were likely prime foraging times, with the heat of the African day reserved for wallowing in mud or water to regulate body temperature. This wasn't just a cooling strategy. The mud coating also provided protection from insects and parasites, essentially serving as a prehistoric spa treatment with the added benefit of camouflage. Water dependency was likely significant for these massive pigs. Like their modern relatives, they probably needed regular access to water sources both for drinking and for creating those all-important wallowing spots. This need would have influenced their range and movements, creating patterns of behavior that followed the availability of water across the seasonal changes of the African landscape. Movement patterns likely followed resource availability. Notochorus wasn't migratory in the dramatic sense of wildebeest crossing the Serengeti, but it was almost certainly mobile enough to shift its foraging grounds as local resources were depleted, or as seasonal changes made some areas more productive than others. This wasn't an animal with a GPS and itinerary. This was an animal that followed its substantial stomach to wherever the eating was good. Intelligence in Notochorus was probably comparable to modern suids, which is to say, surprisingly high for animals primarily known for their association with mud. Modern pigs can solve complex problems, recognize themselves in mirrors, and learn from experience. Notochorus, with its larger brain size, may have been even more cognitively equipped to handle the challenges of its changing environment. This wasn't just muscle wandering around the prehistoric landscape. This was strategic thinking wrapped in a very intimidating package. Sleep patterns likely involved finding relatively secure locations, dense brush, river edges, or areas where the substantial bulk of a Notochorus herd created its own security perimeter. Sleeping arrangements were probably the prehistoric equivalent of a very bristly, snoring fortress, not elegant, but effective. In essence, Notochorus didn't just exist in the Pliocene. It owned real estate in it, dominated the local restaurant scene, and generally conducted itself with the confidence of something that had few natural predators and an all-access pass to most available food sources. This wasn't just surviving. This was thriving with a capital T and several exclamation points. Even a walking tank of pork isn't immune to danger, and the Pliocene African landscape was essentially a lethal theme park designed by nature in one of her more creative moods. Notochorus may have been impressive, but it existed in a world where impressive was the minimum entry requirement for the evolutionary game show. First on our list of things that could ruin a Notochorus day were the Machaerodontines, better known to documentary enthusiasts as saber-toothed cats. These weren't your standard-issue big cats. These were felines that looked at regular teeth and decided that daggers would be more stylish. Species like Homotherium and Meganterion roamed the same landscapes as our protagonist, and they weren't doing it for the scenic views. A full-grown Notochorus would have been a challenging target, even for these specialized predators, but younger or isolated individuals presented the prehistoric equivalent of a drive-through meal. If drive-thrus fought back vigorously with tusks and 1,000 pounds of indignation. Then there were the prehistoric hyenas, and not the laughing scavengers we know today. We're talking about monsters like Chasmoporthetes, the running hyena, which combined the bone-crushing jaws of modern hyenas with the long-distance running abilities of wolves. These weren't opportunistic gigglers. These were endurance predators that could potentially wear down even something as substantial as Notocoerus through the simple strategy of following it until exhaustion made it vulnerable. It was the prehistoric version of debt collectors, persistent, eventually effective, and absolutely no one's idea of a good time. The early big cats were also establishing themselves during this period. While not as specialized as their saber-toothed cousins, they made up for it with versatility and teamwork. A pride of proto-lions would have viewed a sounder of Notocoerus as a challenging but potentially rewarding target, like trying to rob a bank with exceptionally angry guards. Let's not forget the crocodilians, because evolution looked at these reptiles during the dinosaur era and said, "These are perfect. Let's keep them exactly as they are while everything else changes." Prehistoric crocodiles like Crocodilus thorbjarnarsoni grew to massive sizes and patrolled the waterways that Notocoerus would have frequented for drinking and wallowing. These ambush predators turned water sources into danger zones, creating a situation where dying of thirst and becoming something else's lunch were the only available options during dry seasons. But perhaps the most unexpected threat came from fellow herbivores. The Pliocene wasn't just home to Notocoerus. It hosted a variety of other large, grumpy plant eaters that were equally invested in accessing the same resources. Early elephants, prehistoric hippos, and rhinos were all competing for prime real estate near water sources and optimal foraging grounds. Resource competition can be just as dangerous as predation when drought or seasonal scarcity makes every patch of edible vegetation worth fighting over. It was the prehistoric equivalent of Black Friday sales, except instead of discounted electronics, they were fighting over patches of grass, and instead of pushing and shoving, they were using tusks and massive body weight. Environmental threats posed their own challenges. The Pliocene's climatic shifts meant that habitats were changing, sometimes faster than evolution could keep pace. Forests retreated, grasslands expanded, and water sources shifted or disappeared entirely with seasonal or longer-term climate variations. Notocoerus, for all its impressive adaptability, was still bound by its biological needs: water, appropriate food sources, and suitable habitat for reproduction. When these became scarce due to changing climate patterns, even the mightiest pig had to adapt or face local extinction. Disease and parasites, the great equalizers of the natural world, would have presented their own invisible threat. An animal the size of Notocoerus required substantial food intake, making it particularly vulnerable to any pathogen or parasite that affected its ability to forage efficiently. One bad bacterial infection could turn the strongest Notocoerus into the Pliocene equivalent of a clearance sale item at the predator supermarket. Finally, there was the ultimate threat that Notocoerus never saw coming: evolutionary obsolescence. As environments continued to change and new competitors evolved or migrated into its range, Notocoerus eventually found itself in the unfortunate position of being an evolutionary specialist in a world that was increasingly rewarding generalists. It wasn't outfought, it was outmaneuvered by the relentless pace of environmental change and the emergence of more adaptable competitors. In the grand poker game of evolution, Notocoerus had a strong hand size, power, adaptability, and those impressive tusks. But even the strongest hand can lose to changing rules and unexpected wildcards. Our prehistoric protagonist didn't go down without a fight, but eventually, the house always wins. And in this case, the house was an ever-changing planet that had no particular loyalty to any species, no matter how impressively tusked they might be. If you've managed to reach this point in our porcine documentary without developing an unhealthy obsession with prehistoric pigs, congratulations on your remarkable restraint. Now let's dive into the fascinating world of how modern humans have completely misunderstood, misrepresented, or simply missed the boat entirely when it comes to Notocoerus. First, let's address the elephant-sized pig in the room. Despite its impressive dimensions, Notochaurus has been criminally overlooked in popular culture. While dinosaurs get blockbuster movie franchises and saber-toothed cats make regular appearances in Ice Age animations, our tusked protagonist has been relegated to occasional mentions in paleontology textbooks and the odd scientific paper. It's the prehistoric equivalent of being an incredibly talented actor who never gets cast in major roles. Jurassic Park? More like Jurassic parking lot attendant in terms of fame. This obscurity has led to some fascinating misconceptions. When casual fossil enthusiasts do encounter Notochaurus, they often mistake it for a relative of modern warthogs based on superficial tusk similarities. This is like assuming that eagles and penguins must be close relatives because both have beaks. The evolutionary relationships within Suidae are complex, and Notochaurus represents a distinct lineage that eventually gave rise to some modern pig species, but it wasn't just a big warthog any more than a velociraptor was just a weird chicken. Perhaps the most persistent myth surrounding Notochaurus involves its size. Popular accounts tend to either dramatically underestimate or wildly exaggerate how big these animals actually were. Some illustrations depict them as merely slightly larger than modern wild boars, while others portray them as approaching the dimensions of small elephants. The truth, as is often the case, lies somewhere in between, impressive enough to make you reconsider your hiking plans if they still existed, but not quite large enough to feature in monster movies. The discovery history of Notochaurus is itself riddled with curious anecdotes and scientific rivalries. Early fossil finds were initially misclassified, with some specimens being attributed to other genera or even different families entirely. It was the paleontological equivalent of being handed the wrong name tag at a conference and spending the entire event being mistaken for someone else. Eventually, more complete specimens allowed for proper classification, but not before several scientific papers had been published that would later require embarrassing corrections. In modern scientific circles, Notochaurus serves as an important case study in evolutionary adaptation to changing environments. As Africa transitioned from more forested habitats to open savannas during the Pliocene, Notochaurus represents one of the success stories of adaptation, at least temporarily. It's studied as an example of how species can respond to climate change through evolutionary processes, which makes it particularly relevant in our current era of anthropogenic climate disruption. It's essentially the prehistoric poster child for adapting to change, even if that adaptation eventually proved insufficient for long-term survival. The diet of Notochaurus has also been subject to scientific reassessment. Early assumptions based on tooth morphology suggested a primarily grazing lifestyle, similar to modern warthogs. However, more sophisticated analyses of tooth wear patterns and isotope studies have revealed a more complex dietary repertoire that included significant browsing and omnivory. It's the paleontological version of discovering that someone you thought was a strict vegetarian actually hits the drive-thru for burgers when no one is looking. Perhaps the most amusing modern misconception involves the extinction of Notochaurus. Popular accounts often attribute its disappearance to competition with other suids or predation pressure. While these factors certainly played a role, the more complex truth involves changing climatic conditions, habitat transformation, and the emergence of more specialized competitors. It wasn't taken out by a single competitor or predator. It was gradually edged out by a changing world that favored different adaptations. It's less like losing a decisive battle and more like gradually becoming irrelevant in a changing job market. In paleontological collections worldwide, Notochaurus specimens remain important but relatively rare components. Museums occasionally engaging in the scientific equivalent of playground trades to acquire particularly well-preserved examples for their collections. I'll trade you 2 partial Dinotherium jaws and an unidentified antelope horn for that Notochaurus skull is a conversation that has actually happened in the hallowed halls of natural history museums. For modern pig researchers, Notochaurus represents an important evolutionary benchmark, a snapshot of one direction that Suids explored before the lineage that would eventually lead to modern pigs took a different fork in the evolutionary road. It studied not just for what it was, but for what it tells us about the evolutionary plasticity of the entire pig family. Modern pigs, with their remarkable intelligence and adaptability, owe some of their success to the evolutionary groundwork laid by their imposing Pliocene relatives. In the final analysis, Notocoeris serves as a humbling reminder that even the most impressive adaptive strategies have their limitations. In the ever-changing theater of evolution, there are no permanent stars-only actors who hold the spotlight for their moment before the script changes and new characters take center stage. As the African sun sets on our journey through time, we leave Notocoeris where we found it buried in the sediments of history, its massive tusks and robust skeleton silently testifying to a world that no longer exists. A world where being a pig meant being a force of nature, not just a potential bacon source. In the grand evolutionary play, Notocoeris had its moment in the spotlight, a magnificent, tusked performer that strutted and fretted its hour upon the stage before being heard no more. Its lineage continues in the modern wild boars and domestic pigs that root around in forests and farms worldwide, but like a family legend that grows more distorted with each telling, the true magnitude of this prehistoric porker has been lost to all but those who deliberately seek it out. Perhaps there's a lesson in the rise and fall of Notocoeris, a sobering reminder that adaptations perfect for one environmental moment can become liabilities when the climate shifts. That being the biggest, tuskiest pig in Africa works brilliantly until it suddenly doesn't. That no matter how well you play the game of life, the rules can change without warning. Or perhaps the lesson is simpler, that life on Earth has always been a spectacular parade of the unusual, the oversized, and the improbable, that before humans arrived to document and classify and eventually endanger everything, nature was conducting wild evolutionary experiments that would make our most creative genetic engineers look unimaginative by comparison. So the next time you encounter a modern pig, whether it's oinking on a farm, featuring in a children's story, or sizzling on your plate, spare a thought for its magnificent ancestor. For Notocoeris, the pig that didn't just go whole hog on evolution, but redefined what whole hog could possibly mean. In a world of impressive prehistoric creatures, it may not have been the biggest, the fiercest, or the most famous, but pound for porcine pound, it was certainly among the most magnificent examples of nature's capacity to take a simple design and turn it into something extraordinary. Behold the Dinohippus, nature's first draft of the horse before it realized that being useful to humans would ultimately lead to derby hats and glue factories. Picture this. Roughly 5 million years ago, while the rest of nature was figuring out how many teeth a saber-tooth should have, or whether mammals should just give up and let dinosaurs keep the planet, one plucky little equine decided that 4 toes was just way too mainstream. 1 toe is all I need, said Dinohippus, the evolutionary hipster of the Pliocene. And wouldn't you know it, that single-digit rebellion turned out to be the podiatric equivalent of striking gold. While its prehistoric cousins were still experimenting with multi-toe packages, clearly suffering from a severe case of evolutionary indecision, Dinohippus streamlined the whole operation. Think of it as nature's first minimalist, Marie Kondoing its own anatomy millions of years before tidying up became trendy. But let's not mistake Dinohippus for some kind of prehistoric celebrity. It wasn't signing autographs or inspiring cave paintings. This was a creature with precisely one evolutionary goal, not becoming lunch. When you're living in the vast open plains of North America with predators whose entire job description is catch thing, eat thing, you either get fast or get eaten. Dinohippus chose the former, presumably because being digested rarely leads to successful reproduction. So join us as we gallop through the life and times of this ancestral equid, the original one-hit wonder that managed to become the great-great-grand-whatever of every horse, pony, and overpriced show jumper that rich people currently obsess over. From humble grass muncher to evolutionary success story, this is Dinohippus, the mammal that put everything on one toe and hit the evolutionary jackpot. If modern horses had their own Ancestry.com account, Dinohippus would be that surprisingly good-looking great-grandparent in sepia-toned photos that everyone says you got your good legs from. Standing about 4.5 feet tall at the shoulder, roughly the size of a modestly proportioned modern horse, Dinohippus was the equine equivalent of that friend who goes to the gym regularly but doesn't make their entire personality about CrossFit. Imagine taking today's horse, dialing back some of the refinements, and giving it a slightly more primitive face, as if someone had tried to draw a horse after 3 glasses of Pliocene wine. The skull was longer and less domed than modern equus, with a facial profile that said, "I'm evolving as fast as I can, give me a break." Its eyes were positioned more on the sides of its head, all the better for detecting predators while maintaining that perpetually startled expression horses are famous for. The dental situation was particularly telling. Dinohippus sported teeth with moderately developed crowns, the evolutionary response to a lifetime of chewing grass that's basically like sandpaper in plant form. These weren't yet the hypsodont, high-crowned teeth of modern horses, but rather like the beta version that was still working out the bugs. Picture teeth designed by engineers who knew they needed to process grass but hadn't quite perfected the warranty period. But let's get to the truly transformative feature: those feet. If Dinohippus had a dating profile, single-toed and proud of it would have been its headline. While its ancestors had been systematically dropping toes like unwanted Zoom participants, Dinohippus committed fully to the single-toe lifestyle. The central digit, the equivalent of your middle finger, which seems oddly appropriate, had evolved into a sturdy, weight-bearing hoof, while the side toes had been reduced to vestigial splints, like evolutionary footnotes saying, "We used to be important." This single-toe adaptation wasn't just anatomical showboating. The leg structure of Dinohippus represented one of nature's most efficient locomotion systems. Long, slender limbs with fused radius and ulna created a pendulum-like swing that conserved energy. The entire leg had essentially become a spring-loaded pogo stick made of bone, tendon, and evolutionary desperation. The coat? Well, we can't know for certain since soft tissues rarely fossilize, but given its habitat and relatives, Dinohippus likely sported a short, coarse coat similar to modern wild horses, probably in that practical beige color palette that nature loves so much for animals that prefer not to be eaten. Think of it as earth tones designed by a predator avoidance consultant with a limited imagination. Its mane would have been shorter and more erect than modern domestic horses, less flowing Fabio locks, and more practical mohawk. The tail, while useful for swatting at Pliocene flies that were undoubtedly just as annoying as modern ones, wasn't the luxurious banner seen on show horses today. It was the economy version, functional but not winning any equine beauty pageants. Overall, if you saw Dinohippus galloping across the prehistoric plains, your first thought would be, "That's a horse," followed immediately by, "But something's a bit off." Like seeing a celebrity without makeup, or your teacher outside of school, recognizable but somehow disconcerting. It was horse-adjacent, the not-quite-final draft that nature would continue to tweak for another few million years before arriving at the modern version that would eventually carry humans into battle, pull their plows, and lose them money at racetracks. Welcome to the late Miocene and early Pliocene epochs, roughly 5 to 2 million years ago, a time when Earth was basically running a global experiment called "What Happens If We Turn Down the Thermostat?" The planet was gradually cooling from its previous hothouse state, and grasslands were spreading across continents like nature's version of suburban lawn enthusiasts. North America, Dinohippus's stomping ground, was experiencing a dramatic makeover. The lush forests that had dominated the landscape were retreating, replaced by vast expanses of grassland that stretched from horizon to horizon. It was like Earth's version of trading in a shag carpet for hardwood floors, more practical, easier to maintain, but requiring specialized tools to utilize properly. Those tools, in Dinohippus's case, were its evolving teeth and single-toed feet. The climate during this period was experiencing more mood swings than a teenager. Seasonal variations became more pronounced, with distinct wet and dry periods. Temperatures were cooling overall, but with enough warm periods to keep everyone guessing. This climatic identity crisis triggered one of the most significant ecosystem shifts in recent geological history: the spread of C4 grasslands. For those who skipped botanical biochemistry, C4 plants represent nature's upgraded photosynthesis system, more efficient in hot, dry conditions than their C3 predecessors. These grasses were tougher, more fibrous, and required specialized equipment to process, like needing a particular app to open a specific file format. Dinohippus was among the mammals upgrading their dental software to handle this new plant type. The North American landscape where Dinohippus roamed resembled the modern African savanna. Vast grass seas punctuated by scattered trees, with the occasional waterway cutting through the terrain. Picture the set of The Lion King, but with less singing and more evolutionary pressure. These open spaces created a particular challenge. There was nowhere to hide. When predators can see you from a mile away, your options narrow considerably to be faster or be lunch. Dinohippus shared this increasingly open world with an ensemble cast of megafauna that would make any natural history museum curator weak at the knees. Mastodons and Gomphotheres, early elephant relatives with dental equipment that would make an orthodontist faint, plodded across the landscape. Early camels, yes, camels evolved in North America in one of evolution's more ironic geographic plot twists, competed for grazing resources. The apex predators of this period weren't playing around either. Amphision, the bear dog, combined the worst features of both animals from a prey's perspective. Borophagine dogs, powerfully built canids with bone-crushing jaws, hunted in packs. And let's not forget the cats. Saber-toothed machairodontines were evolving into their prime, experimenting with various fang lengths like prehistoric orthodontists gone rogue. This period also witnessed the Great American Biotic Interchange, when North and South America finally got around to connecting via the Panama Land Bridge after spending millions of years giving each other the geological cold shoulder. This continental meet-cute allowed animals to migrate between the previously isolated continents, creating new competitive pressures and ecological relationships. For Dinohippus, this changing world represented both opportunity and challenge. The expanding grasslands provided abundant food sources for those equipped to process tough grass. But these open spaces also created an evolutionary arms race between predator and prey, each adapting to the other in a prehistoric version of one-upmanship. The Pliocene Earth was also experiencing dramatic shifts in sea levels and weather patterns. Periodic glaciations were beginning to grip the northern continents, causing fluctuations in habitable zones. For a species like Dinohippus, this meant adapting to seasonal changes in food availability and occasionally relocating as the climate shifted their preferred habitat. Against this backdrop of environmental flux, Dinohippus represented one of evolution's more successful experiments, a specialist adapted to a specific ecological niche that was, fortunately for it, expanding rather than contracting. While other lineages found themselves on evolutionary dead ends as their habitats disappeared, Dinohippus had inadvertently backed the winning environmental horse, so to speak. So picture our single-toed protagonist, standing tall in the wind-swept grasslands of Pliocene North America, surrounded by prehistoric megafauna, shifting climates, and evolutionary pressures that would ultimately forge it into the modern horse. Like a contestant on a reality show who doesn't realize they're being filmed, Dinohippus was unwittingly participating in one of nature's most successful makeover episodes. If Dinohippus had a LinkedIn profile, its job description would have read, "Professional grass processor with secondary skills in not becoming predator food." Its daily routine made modern 9-to-5 jobs look like a vacation, a constant cycle of eating, watching for predators, eating more, running from predators, finding new eating spots, and occasionally engaging in the awkward dance of reproduction. Let's talk about that eating habit first, shall we? Dinohippus was what nutritionists might call a volume eater. When your primary food source has the nutritional density of packing material, quantity becomes quality. These animals spent upwards of 16 hours per day grazing, essentially working a double shift at the grass processing plant with minimal breaks and no overtime pay. The single-toe adaptation that made Dinohippus famous wasn't just for show. It represented a fundamental shift in locomotion strategy. Previous horse ancestors had been more forest-dwelling browsers, picking tender leaves and moving relatively slowly through denser vegetation. Dinohippus, by contrast, had evolved for sustained running across open terrain. Its gait was a marvel of biological engineering, a pendulum-like motion that conserved energy while covering distance efficiently. Think of it as nature's first hybrid engine, not the fastest starter. Those saber-tooths would still have beaten it off the line, but with impressive fuel economy for long-distance travel. This locomotion style allowed Dinohippus to employ what safety experts call strategic distance management and what the rest of us call staying the hell away from things that want to eat you. Social structure was another critical aspect of Dinohippus life. Based on both fossil evidence and the behavior of modern equids, these animals likely lived in small family groups led by a dominant stallion, the prehistoric equivalent of that one friend who always insists on driving and choosing the restaurant. These bands typically consisted of several mares and their offspring, creating a mobile unit that could collectively watch for danger while grazing. The advantages of this social arrangement were numerous. Multiple pairs of eyes meant better predator detection. Group defense could confuse or deter some predators. And for young Dinohippus, the herd provided a living educational system where they could learn essential skills like which plants won't kill you and how to run in a straight line without tripping over your own feet. Lessons that meant the difference between reaching reproductive age and becoming an evolutionary footnote. Speaking of reproduction, Dinohippus followed the typical equid reproductive pattern, a system that prioritized quality over quantity. Mares likely gave birth to single precocial foals that could stand and run within hours of birth. This strategy represents the put all your eggs in one basket, but make sure that basket can run really fast approach to reproductive success. The gestation period was likely similar to modern horses, around 11 months of pregnancy followed by the equine equivalent of an extremely rushed departure from the maternity ward. When predators view your newborn as a convenient snack pack, lingering in post-birth vulnerability isn't an option. Young Dinohippus had to master standing, walking, and keeping up with the herd with an urgency that would make helicopter parents proud. Seasonal migrations were probably another key aspect of Dinohippus behavior. As grasslands responded to annual climate cycles, these equids would have followed the optimal grazing conditions, nature's version of following a food truck festival across the country. These migrations weren't the epic continental traverses seen in some modern animals, but rather regional shifts that balanced food quality, predator pressure, and climate conditions. Communication within Dinohippus herds likely relied on a sophisticated system of vocalizations, body postures, and ear positions, proving that horses were perfecting the art of saying everything without speaking millennia before teenagers mastered the eye roll. A flick of the ear could signal potential danger, while body posturing established and maintained the complex social hierarchies within the herd. Grooming behaviors served both hygienic and social functions. Mutual grooming, where individuals nibble at each other's coats, removed parasites while simultaneously reinforcing social bonds. It was prehistoric social networking, minus the misleading profile pictures and political arguments. Water requirements shaped daily movements, with herds typically visiting water sources during safer daylight hours when predators were less active. These watering holes represented both necessity and danger, the prehistoric equivalent of that sketchy convenience store that has the only ATM for miles. You need what it offers, but you don't want to linger. Interestingly, Dinohippus likely exhibited the same bizarre sleep patterns seen in modern horses, the ability to sleep standing up thanks to a stay apparatus in the legs that locked joints in place without muscular effort. This evolutionary adaptation meant they could rest while maintaining readiness to flee, the biological equivalent of sleeping with one eye open. Intelligence in Dinohippus was nothing to neigh at either. With a brain-to-body ratio larger than many contemporaneous herbivores, these animals possessed impressive environmental awareness, spatial memory, and problem-solving abilities. They could remember migration routes, recognize individual herd members, and learn from experiences, skills that proved particularly valuable when failure to learn often meant failure to continue existing. Sensory adaptations further enhanced survival prospects. Eyes positioned on the sides of the head provided nearly 360-degree vision, nature's ultimate security camera system. Highly mobile ears could independently swivel towards sounds, while an acute sense of smell detected both predators and the subtle differences between grass varieties that might mean the difference between nutrition and intestinal distress. The life of Dinohippus wasn't all constant terror and grass processing, though. Young foals engaged in play behaviors that developed crucial motor skills and social interactions. Adults formed genuine social bonds within herds, and on those rare moments when predator pressure eased and food was abundant, they might even have experienced something approximating relaxation, though probably still while standing up, ears twitching at every sound because old habits die hard. In essence, Dinohippus crafted the template for equid success, a blueprint combining efficient locomotion, social cooperation, and specialized feeding that would carry its descendants through to the present day. Not bad for an animal whose entire evolutionary strategy could be summarized as one toe good, four toes bad. If Dinohippus had nightmares, they would have featured a rotating cast of Pliocene predators, each more creatively terrifying than the last. Living in the open grasslands of North America was the ecological equivalent of being the slowest runner in a zombie apocalypse. Survival depended entirely on not being the easiest target available. Leading the prehistoric hit parade of things that wanted to eat Dinohippus were the Machirodontine saber-toothed cats. These weren't your modern house cats with attitude problems. These were 400-pound killing machines with dental equipment that looked like it was designed by an overzealous horror movie prop department. Species like Homotherium had serrated canines designed to slice through flesh with disturbing efficiency. Their hunting strategy involved ambush and a neck bite that would sever the windpipe or major blood vessels. Quick, efficient, and absolutely terrifying if you happened to be on the receiving end. Complementing the saber-tooths were the Borophagine bone-crushing dogs, powerfully built canids that hunted in packs and could process every part of their prey, bones included. Their jaws generated enough force to crack marrow bones like humans crack peanut shells. Think of them as wolves that spent too much time at the gym and had something to prove. Their pack hunting tactics meant that even a vigilant Dinohippus could find itself surrounded if it made the mistake of being separated from its herd. The bear dogs, amphibianids, represented another threat category entirely. Combining the worst features of both namesake animals from a prey perspective, these predators had a bear's power with a dog's pursuit capabilities. Some species weighed over 1,500 pounds, roughly the size of a compact car with teeth and a bad attitude. Their hunting style was less about stealth and more about overwhelming force, the prehistoric equivalent of bringing a tank to a knife fight. Then there were the giant short-faced bears with species like Agriotherium lurking in the Pliocene landscape. Standing over 5 feet tall at the shoulder when on all fours, these behemoths could rear up to terrifying heights. Their long limbs gave them surprising speed for animals of their size, meaning that just outrun it wasn't always a viable Dinohippus defense strategy. Not all threats came from mammalian predators. The Pliocene also hosted massive birds of prey like Iolornis incredibilis, a condor-like bird with a 16-foot wingspan that could potentially target vulnerable Dinohippus foals. While adult Dinohippus were too large to be at risk from aerial predation, their young represented convenient grab-and-go meals for these prehistoric raptors. Even reptiles got in on the Dinohippus hunting action. Giant alligators lurked in waterways, turning necessary drinking stops into potential death traps. These reptilian ambush predators had perfected the art of patience, waiting motionless until an unwary Dinohippus came within striking range, then launching with explosive speed that belied their normally sluggish appearance. Weather and environmental conditions posed their own set of threats. Droughts could render vast grasslands into food deserts, forcing Dinohippus herds to travel farther between water sources, increasing both energy expenditure and exposure to predators. Flash floods could trap herds in low-lying areas, while lightning-sparked wildfires could race across dry grasslands faster than even the swiftest Dinohippus could run. Disease and parasites represented more insidious dangers. Ticks, botflies, and internal parasites could weaken individuals, making them more vulnerable to predation or environmental stressors. Infectious diseases could spread rapidly through herds, particularly during dry seasons when animals concentrated around limited water sources, nature's version of a badly ventilated office during flu season. Competition from other herbivores added another layer of challenge. Dinohippus shared its grassland habitat with other equids at various stages of evolutionary development, creating competition within its own family tree. Early camels, pronghorns, and various cervids all competed for the same grass resources. During lean times, this competition could mean the difference between adequate nutrition and weakness-inducing hunger. Reproductive vulnerabilities created seasonal windows of increased risk. Pregnant mares moved more slowly and required more nutrition. Newborn foals represented easy targets for predators of all sizes. Even the breeding season itself created distractions, as stallions focused on competing for mares rather than maintaining optimal vigilance against predators, proving that even in prehistoric times, romance could be a dangerous distraction. Perhaps the most significant long-term threat to Dinohippus came from climate change. The cooling trend of the late Pliocene was pushing ecosystems toward the ice ages that would characterize the Pleistocene. These shifts altered vegetation patterns, changed migration routes, and reshuffled predator-prey relationships. Adaptability became as important as speed or strength. Survival increasingly depended on the ability to adjust to changing conditions. Interestingly, one of the greatest threats to Dinohippus's continued distinct existence was its own evolutionary success. As it continued to adapt to its niche, it gradually transformed into early equus, effectively evolving itself out of existence by becoming something new. It's the taxonomic equivalent of being so good at your job that you get promoted to a position with a different title. Through all these threats, Dinohippus employed a sophisticated survival toolkit: vigilance, speed, social cooperation, and reproductive strategy. The fact that its genetic legacy continues in every modern horse suggests that while individual Dinohippus certainly fell victim to these myriad threats, the lineage as a whole mastered the art of staying just one evolutionary step ahead of disaster, running on a single toe toward the future while the jaws of extinction snapped at its heels. Let's gallop straight into the minefield of misconceptions surrounding our one-toed wonder, shall we? First, despite what your third-grade teacher might have told you, horse evolution wasn't the neat, linear progression displayed in those classroom posters. You know the ones, showing a fox-sized Hyracotherium transforming into a modern horse through a convenient series of ever larger models, like Apple releasing increasingly bigger iPhones. Reality check. Horse evolution resembled a bush more than a ladder, with multiple branches evolving simultaneously, experimenting with different adaptations, and frequently ending in evolutionary dead ends. Dinohippus wasn't the only horse-like creature of its time. It was simply the one that happened to win evolution's unforgiving lottery. Perhaps the most persistent myth is that horses disappeared from North America entirely after evolving there, only to be reintroduced by Europeans. While horses did indeed go extinct in the Americas around 10,000 years ago, Dinohippus had already given rise to Equus, the modern horse genus, well before that extinction event. So yes, Columbus and company did bring horses back to the Americas, but it was more of a homecoming than an introduction, like returning a library book to its original branch after it had been checked out for 10,000 years. Another common misconception involves Dinohippus's single-toe adaptation. Many assume this evolved purely for speed, but that's only partially correct. The single toe also provided energy efficiency for sustained movement, stability on various surfaces, and reduced weight at the end of the limb, creating a pendulum effect that conserved energy. It wasn't just about outrunning predators, it was about outrunning them while using the minimum necessary calories, efficiency that would make any modern engineer jealous. The relationship between Dinohippus and modern horses also gets muddled in popular understanding. Dinohippus wasn't just an ancestor of modern horses, it was essentially caught in the act of becoming the genus Equus. The transition was so gradual that paleontologists still debate where exactly to draw the line between late Dinohippus and early Equus, the taxonomic equivalent of trying to determine exactly when that leftovers container in your fridge officially became inedible. In pop culture, prehistoric horses rarely get the spotlight compared to their more charismatic contemporaries. While saber-tooths and mammoths star in Ice Age movies, ancestral horses are typically relegated to background characters or ignored entirely. Dinohippus has never had its Hollywood moment. No animated franchise, no museum centerpiece, not even a decent supporting role in a documentary narrated by David Attenborough. It's the character actor of prehistoric mammals, essential to the story, but never getting top billing. Paleontological knowledge about Dinohippus continues to evolve as new fossils are discovered. Recent findings have refined our understanding of when and how the transition to single-toed locomotion occurred. Modern techniques like isotope analysis of teeth have revealed details about Dinohippus's diet and habitat that weren't available to earlier researchers. Even its geographic range has been expanded by new discoveries, painting a picture of an animal more widespread and adaptable than previously thought. The study of Dinohippus has practical applications beyond satisfying scientific curiosity. Understanding how these animals adapted to changing environments provides insights into how modern species might respond to current climate change. Their efficient locomotion has informed biomechanical engineering. Even their dental adaptations have contributed to our understanding of how mammals can process different food resources as environments change. Perhaps the most fascinating modern revelation about Dinohippus concerns its brain. Endocasts, models of brain shape based on the interior of fossil skulls, suggest that Dinohippus had already developed the expanded cerebral cortex seen in modern horses. This neural architecture supported complex social behavior, environmental awareness, and problem-solving abilities, cognitive tools as important to survival as physical adaptations. The genetic legacy of Dinohippus persists not just in domestic horses, but in the conservation challenges facing modern equids. Of the 7 living species of equids, horses, asses, and zebras, more than half are endangered or threatened. The very adaptations that made Dinohippus and its descendants successful, specialized grazing, specific habitat requirements, complex social structures, now make them vulnerable in a human-dominated world where grasslands are being converted to agriculture and development at alarming rates. For horse enthusiasts and breeders, Dinohippus represents the origin point of many traits still valued today. The efficient locomotion, social intelligence, and grazing adaptations that evolved in creatures like Dinohippus continue to define what we recognize as horse-like qualities. From Kentucky Derby winners to therapy horses, the genetic echo of Dinohippus influences every equine that has come after it. So while Dinohippus may not have its own animated movie franchise or museum gift shop merchandise line, its evolutionary innovations continue to gallop through time, one toe at a time, influencing our understanding of evolution, adaptation, and the complex relationship between form, function, and survival in a changing world. As the sun sets on our Pliocene panorama, we leave Dinohippus where we found it, poised at that most fascinating of evolutionary moments, neither fully what came before nor quite what would come after. The story of Dinohippus isn't just about an animal that decided 4 toes were excessive. It's about the relentless creativity of evolution, that blind watchmaker that somehow crafted one of the most efficient locomotion systems on the planet through nothing more than survival, reproduction, and the merciless culling of alternatives that didn't quite make the cut. Its natural selection as the ultimate editor, red-penning genetic drafts until only the most effective adaptations remain. Consider for a moment the astonishing continuity that connects Dinohippus to the horse that might be standing in a field near you right now. When that modern horse pricks its ears at a distant sound, it's performing the same vigilance behavior that helped Dinohippus avoid becoming saber-toothed takeout. When it runs with that impossibly elegant stride, it's employing the same single-toed efficiency that Dinohippus pioneered. And when it forms social bonds with herd mates, it's expressing social patterns established when grasslands were still a relatively new feature on Earth's surface. Perhaps most poignant is what Dinohippus never knew, that its kind would eventually form one of the most consequential partnerships in human history. These grazing specialists that evolved purely to process grass and avoid predators would, millions of years later, carry humans into battle, pull their plows, transport their goods, and ultimately transform human civilization. From Genghis Khan's Mongol hordes to the American Pony Express, from Napoleon's cavalry to modern Olympic equestrians, the echoes of Dinohippus's adaptations have shaped human history in ways no Pliocene mammal could possibly have predicted. And yet for all this evolutionary success, the story of equids also serves as a warning. The very grasslands that shaped Dinohippus are among the most endangered habitats on Earth today. Wild equid species face extinction threats across their ranges. The partnership between horses and humans, once essential to civilization, has largely been relegated to sport and hobby in the age of engines and algorithms. So, next time you see a horse, whether it's winning the Triple Crown, giving a child her first riding lesson, or simply grazing in a pasture, take a moment to see beyond the animal before you. Look back through the mists of time to its single-toed ancestor, navigating a changing world with nothing but adaptation as its guide. That horse is a living time capsule, carrying within it the genetic legacy of Dinohippus and all the evolutionary experiments, successful adaptations, and narrow escapes that brought its lineage to the present day. In the grand pageant of evolution, Dinohippus may have been just one actor on a very crowded stage, but it played its part with such singular success that its descendants still run across our world on that same distinctive single toe, the ultimate evolutionary standing ovation for a performance 5 million years in the making.